All right, let's get ready to unpack a real mystery here. A real life mystery, actually, and it's one that's still unsolved to this day.
Yeah, cold cases are always so fascinating.
They really are, especially ones like this.
Yeah.
Today, we're looking into the Honolulu Strangler case.
Oh, wow. Okay, this is a case I know a little bit about.
I think a lot of people have at least heard of this one.
Definitely.
You want to learn more about these unsolved serial killings?
Absolutely.
Well, they terrorized Honolulu back in the mid-'80s. 5 women were murdered, and they never found the guy.
That's right. Still unsolved.
We've got some great sources for this deep dive, too.
Okay, great.
Excerpts from the Wikipedia article on the Honolulu Strangler case.
Okay.
And then also, we're going to be listening to and using information from the Case File True Crime Podcast episode about this case as well.
Sounds good. I love those guys.
So yeah, let's unpack everything we know about the victims.
Okay.
Examine the investigation and see if we can maybe try to piece together what happened here.
Yeah, this is a perplexing case for sure.
It really is.
What gets me about this case is that it really just totally shook Honolulu.
Yeah.
It's 1985, picture it, tropical paradise, beautiful beaches,
Yeah.
vibrant culture, and all of a sudden this dark cloud of fear just settles over the island.
Right.
A serial killer on the loose.
It really does kind of ruin that image of paradise, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
And on top of that, this isn't even the first serial killer Hawaii has ever seen.
That's right.
This is actually the second one. The first was a guy named Eugene Barrett.
Right.
It really makes you wonder, is there something about the isolation of living on an island that contributes to this?
That's a really fascinating thought.
Yeah.
You know, island communities, they often have a really strong sense of being separate from the mainland.
Right. They're insular.
Insular, exactly.
Yeah.
So you know it's possible that this could create a very unique psychological environment.
Yeah, that's interesting.
One that contributes to people feeling anonymous or detached.
Okay, let's get into the victims here. So we know there were 5 women, all murdered within a relatively short time frame.
Right.
And this random selection of victims, I think, really points to just like a key part of what makes a serial killer terrifying.
It's a huge part of it.
Because when it seems random,
Absolutely.
it creates widespread fear because anyone could be next.
Right.
So that unpredictability really is terrifying.
Definitely. And it really added to the terror in Honolulu at the time.
Makes sense.
It felt like it could be anyone.
Right.
So the first victim was Vicki Gale Purdy. She was 25 years old.
Okay.
She was a military wife married to an Army helicopter pilot.
Oh, wow.
She liked to go dancing.
Fun.
And she worked at a video store that handled adult films.
Interesting. And didn't her husband actually suggest to the police that maybe her job at the video store had something to do with her death?
Yeah, he did bring that up.
Yeah.
He mentioned that there had been another incident at the video store like a year earlier where 2 women had been stabbed.
Oh, geez.
But that lead went nowhere.
Okay, so nothing there.
And then just a few months later, you have Regina Sakamoto. She was 17.
17, wow.
Yeah, just a high school student getting ready for college, excited about the future.
Right.
Last anyone heard, she was on the phone with her boyfriend talking about how she was going to be late for school because she had missed the bus.
It's so sad. These 2 young women, totally different lives, and it just seems so random. Was it after Regina that the police really started thinking, okay, maybe this is a serial killer?
Yeah, the similarities were just too strong to ignore at that point.
Okay.
Both women found near water, Vicki at Kihi Lagoon and Regina at the same spot.
Oh, wow.
Both of them hands bound behind their backs.
Okay.
Both had been sexually assaulted and strangled.
So the location, the restraints, the nature of the assault, it's starting to look like a pattern.
Definitely a potential pattern.
It's scary to think that this is a signature almost.
Exactly like a calling card.
Right, yeah.
And then tragically, we have Denise Hughes. She was 21 years old, worked as a secretary, very active in her church. She relied on the bus to get around. And when she didn't show up for work one day, that's when everybody started worrying.
Yeah.
Her body was found a few days later in Moanalua Stream,
Okay.
like the others. Sexually assaulted, strangled hands, bound.
3 murders in just a few months. So the city must have been on edge at this point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And this third murder, it happened just weeks after Regina.
Wow.
This is the tipping point.
Yeah.
The Honolulu PD knew they were dealing with a serial killer.
Okay, so that's when they formed the task force, right?
Exactly.
Okay, bringing in 27 officers, the FBI, even experts from the Green River Task Force.
That's right.
That's a huge amount of resources.
It was massive. You know, a serial killer task force, it's designed to really bring all the resources together in one place. So you've got detectives, Forensic specialists, profilers, everybody who needs to be there to crack a case like this, all working together.
Right.
And they also have access to databases and resources that can help identify suspects across state lines,
Okay.
which is vital in a case like this.
Right, so they were pulling out all the stops.
Absolutely.
Did they manage to come up with a profile of the killer?
They did.
Okay.
The police, they believe that the killer was most likely what we call an opportunist,
An opportunist.
meaning he probably wasn't stalking specific women. He was choosing his victims based on how vulnerable they seemed in that moment.
Okay.
So perhaps at bus stops or in isolated areas.
Makes sense.
And they also theorized that he probably lived or worked somewhere near where the bodies were found,
Okay.
which led them to focus on areas like Waipahu and Sand Island.
So someone who knows the area well enough to move around undetected? Do
Exactly.
they consider the possibility of a copycat?
They did,
Okay.
but there was no evidence to suggest that. The M.O. remained consistent across all 5 murders,
Yeah,
which really points to a single perpetrator.
makes sense. So did the murder stop after Denise Hughes?
No, they did not, sadly. The killer struck again, taking the life of Louise Medeiros. She was 25,
Okay.
and she had been in Kauai with family after her mother passed away.
Oh, wow.
And she was actually on a flight back to Oahu when she disappeared.
That's scary.
Yeah,
You're on a flight, you're coming home, you think you're safe.
you would think. Her body was found weeks later near Wakely Scream. Same M.O., hands-bound signs of sexual assault strangulation.
Okay.
The fear in Honolulu was just palpable at this point. Police were setting up sting operations using female officers as decoys around Kihi Lagoon and the airport.
It's just heartbreaking to think about all these women, all these lives cut short, and then Linda Pesse becomes the 5th victim. Did her pace bring any new clues to light?
Linda's murder did bring in some new information,
Okay.
but not in the way anybody expected. She was 36 years old. She had a roommate. She held a professional job that involved meetings. The day she disappeared, she told her roommate she'd be home late because of work.
Okay.
And then her car was found abandoned on the side of the Nimitz H1 viaduct,
Oh, wow.
which was nowhere near her work.
Okay, so this is where things get strange.
This is where things take a turn.
Okay, I'm ready. What happened?
A man named Howard Gay came forward.
Howard Day.
Yeah, claiming that a psychic had told him a body could be found at Sand Island.
A psychic? What? I bet the police were not happy about that.
You would think, right. But Gay was really insistent.
Okay.
He even took them to the specific spot the psychic mentioned. They
Okay.
didn't find anything there.
So dead end, right? Case closed.
Not exactly.
Okay.
So the police, they were spurred by this. They decided to search the whole island.
Wow.
And that's when they found Linda's body.
So even though the psychic didn't get the location exactly right,
Right.
they were in the right area.
Yeah.
Okay. And they found her body the same MO.
Sadly, yes.
Okay.
Nude hands bound behind her back. But the focus on Howard Gay didn't end there.
This is where you said things were about to get interesting.
Yes.
So tell me about this Howard Gay. Why did he become such a strong suspect?
Well, after Linda's body was found, the police naturally took a closer look at him.
Right.
They talked to his ex-wife and they spoke to his current girlfriend.
Okay.
And what they learned raised some serious red flags.
Okay, let's have it. What'd they find out?
Both women described Gay as incredibly smooth talking,
Oh.
someone who could easily charm his way into people's lives.
Okay.
They also revealed something pretty incriminating.
Okay.
Gay had a very specific fetish
Okay.
for bondage,
Bondage.
specifically tying women's hands behind their backs during sex.
Wait, just like the victims?
Yeah,
And his ex and his current girlfriend knew about this?
they did. And it gets worse.
Oh, boy.
Gay's girlfriend told the police that whenever they had a fight, he would leave the house for hours at a time. And guess what?
What?
Those nights often coincided with the nights of the murders.
That is so disturbing.
Yeah.
So they brought him in for questioning.
Oh, yeah, they did.
Okay.
They interrogated him for hours. They even gave him a polygraph.
Uh-oh.
He failed.
Okay.
But despite all these suspicions, they couldn't find any concrete evidence that directly linked him to the murders.
So they had to let him go.
Reluctantly, yes.
Okay.
But they didn't give up on him entirely.
Okay.
They kept him under surveillance.
Okay.
And they offered a $25,000 reward for any information that could lead to an arrest.
That's a lot of money. Did anyone come forward?
Amazingly, yes. A couple of months later, a woman contacted the police claiming that she had seen a man with one of the victims on the night of her murder.
Wow.
And she identified Gay from a photo lineup as the man she saw.
That's huge. Why didn't they arrest him then?
This is where things get really complicated.
Okay.
This witness, she was terrified to testify.
Oh, wow.
She believed that Gay had seen her that night
Uh-oh.
and was afraid of what he might do if she spoke out.
So her fear basically shut down the investigation.
It really complicated things. And even though her testimony was never officially used, it just added another layer of suspicion to Gay's already questionable behavior.
So they had a suspect who's got a matching MO, a possible connection to the crime scenes, failed a polygraph, and a witness who could place him with a victim. But still they couldn't make the case.
It's the frustrating reality of this case.
Wow.
Despite all of the circumstantial evidence, they couldn't find that one piece of irrefutable proof that connected Gay to the murders.
And as we know, Howard Gay died in 2003, taking whatever secrets he had to the grave.
That's right.
Which leaves us with a lot of unanswered questions.
A ton of them.
Was Howard Gay the Honolulu Strangler? If not, who was it?
Right. And why did the murders suddenly stop after Linda Pesci?
Right.
Did something happen to the killer, or did he just decide to stop?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Could advances in DNA technology help solve this case after all these years?
Maybe.
These are questions that investigators and the families of the victims still ask themselves.
It is baffling, and I feel like we've only just scratched the surface here.
Yeah.
But before we go any further, let's take a minute and think about the victims here. It's easy to get caught up in the details of the investigation.
Right.
But we can't forget about the impact these murders had on Honolulu.
Absolutely.
The human cost of these crimes. 5 women lost their lives, families were destroyed, and a whole community was left grappling with fear and uncertainty.
You're absolutely right. This wasn't just a series of isolated incidents. It cast a long shadow over the entire island.
Right.
People were afraid to go out alone, especially at night.
Oh, I bet.
Parents were terrified for their daughters.
Right.
It created a sense of vulnerability that just permeated everyday life.
It's heartbreaking to think about these ripple effects, how these murders touched so many lives beyond just the victims themselves.
Absolutely.
So did this lead to any lasting changes for law enforcement on the island?
I think it really raised awareness about the importance of public safety
Makes sense.
and the need to be more vigilant. The police department implemented a lot of new initiatives that were aimed at improving community outreach, increasing patrols in high-risk areas, and enhancing crime prevention strategies.
So it's sad that it took something this awful to bring about these changes, but
True.
it's good that they made those changes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But it's important to remember that even though this case is still unsolved, it serves as this reminder to all of us that we're all vulnerable.
You are absolutely right, even in the most idyllic settings.
Right.
And it underscores the need to be aware of our surroundings, to trust our instincts, and to take precautions to protect ourselves and the people we care about.
Well said.
Thank you.
So let's not forget about the families of these victims. They're still left with so many unanswered questions.
Absolutely.
Still wondering if they'll ever see justice. It's a heavy burden to carry that lack of resolution.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, it speaks to how important it is that we keep investigating cold cases like this. Even if it seems hopeless, there's always a chance new evidence could come up, that technology will get better, that somebody who knows something will come forward.
Yeah, they've been able to solve cold cases that were decades old just by re-examining the evidence with new techniques.
Right.
DNA technology has come a long way since the 1980s.
It really has.
So could that be the key to unlocking this mystery?
It's possible.
Yeah.
If any biological material from the killer was preserved at the crime scenes, there's a chance that it could be analyzed and matched to a potential suspect,
Okay.
either through a DNA database or familial DNA searching.
Can you explain what familial DNA searching is? I don't think everybody knows what that is.
Sure. So imagine you're trying to find a distant relative on a genealogy website. You might not have their exact name, but you can use family trees and other information to connect the dots. Familial DNA searching is similar. You're using DNA to connect the dots.
Okay.
So if you find a partial DNA match to someone in a database, it could lead you to a close relative of the killer.
Oh, wow.
And then maybe to the killer himself.
That's incredible. So we might one day be able to solve these cold cases using family trees built from DNA. That'd be amazing.
That would be pretty incredible.
To finally bring closure to this after all these years.
It would be.
Yeah.
But even if the case stays unsolved, it serves as a really valuable reminder that people are dedicated to working on this and trying to bring justice to victims,
Yeah.
even when it seems impossible.
Absolutely. The Honolulu Strangler case might be cold, but it's not forgotten.
Right.
The memory of the victims lives on, and the search for answers continues. So you spent a lot of time with this case. What stood out to you the most about this case? What surprised you?
You know what struck me was the randomness of it.
The randomness.
These victims, they came from such diverse backgrounds,
Mm-hmm.
different ages, different lifestyles.
Right.
There doesn't seem to be a clear pattern. There wasn't a specific type of woman the killer was targeting.
That's really unsettling. It makes the killer seem so much more unpredictable, so much more dangerous.
It does.
As if anyone could have been a target.
That's the reality of serial killers. They often operate outside the bounds of logic and reason.
Right, yeah.
It makes their actions difficult to predict or even really comprehend.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
It makes this case all the more impactful. I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
Exploring the facts of the case, the victims, the investigation, the lingering mysteries.
Yes.
But before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. If you were an investigator on this case, what would you do next? Where would you look for that missing piece of the puzzle that could finally crack this thing wide open?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it's one that investigators are still grappling with.
Right.
I think the key is to go back and look at the evidence with fresh eyes, using the newest forensic technology, and explore every new lead that comes up, no matter how small.
So basically, don't give up.
Basically.
Even the coldest cases can heat back up.
That's right.
Yeah, with the right combination of persistence and innovation and maybe a little bit of luck.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe one day the Honolulu Strangler mystery will finally be solved,
I hope so.
bringing peace to the families of the victims and restoring a sense of safety and justice to Oahu.
That's a good goal.
Yeah.
Well, before we move on to part 2 of our deep dive into the Honolulu Strangler case, let's take a quick break.
Sounds good.
Hmm.
It's really interesting how much attention this case still gets,
Yeah.
even though it's been cold for so long.
I think it's the mystery, the unsolved nature of it.
Yeah, people just want answers. They want to know who did it.
Makes sense. And, we've talked about Howard Gay.
Right,
He's the prime suspect, even though he was never charged.
right.
But you mentioned that the police looked at other possibilities, too.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
The task force was made up of some very experienced detectives,
Right.
and they brought in help from the mainland, too.
You said some people from the Green River Task Force, even.
Exactly. These were people who had seen it all, investigated tons of leads, interviewed countless suspects. So even though Howard Gay was a big focus, they were keeping an open mind.
Okay, so what other theories did they look into? Anything that really stood out?
Well, one theory that I found interesting was the idea that the killer might have been someone just passing through.
Oh, like a transient.
Yeah, someone just visiting the islands,
Uh.
you know, taking advantage of the anonymity that a place like Hawaii offers.
Oh. Right, it's a tourist destination. People come and go all the time.
Exactly. And remember, this was the mid-'80s,
Pre-internet days.
way before widespread surveillance cameras. DNA analysis wasn't as advanced back then.
Right.
Tracking someone's movements was a lot harder.
It's like trying to find a needle in a haystack.
Pretty much.
But okay, let's say it wasn't a visitor. Let's say it was someone who lived and worked in Honolulu.
Okay.
Wouldn't that make Howard Gay even more likely to be the guy? He lived there, he knew the area, and we know he had that concerning fetish.
It's true. Gay fits that profile on the surface, but we have to be careful about jumping to conclusions. There are a lot of people who live and work in Honolulu who would never hurt anyone.
Right.
And having a fetish doesn't automatically make you a murderer.
Very true. Correlation doesn't equal causation.
Exactly. But still, you have to admit the evidence against Gay is pretty compelling.
It is. There's the MO, the failed polygraph, the witness who placed him with a victim.
Right. Those are all significant factors, but they just weren't enough for a conviction.
And now he's dead, so it seems like a dead end.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge.
So are there any other ways to investigate this? Do you think anything else they could look into?
I think there are a few things that could potentially shed some new light on the case.
Okay.
For one thing, DNA technology has advanced so much since the 80s.
Right.
If they have any biological material from the crime scenes, they could reanalyze it using techniques that weren't available back then.
We've seen that happen with other cold cases. They find DNA that was just sitting there, and it cracks the case wide open.
Exactly.
What about that familial DNA searching you mentioned earlier? Could that work here?
It's definitely worth looking into. If the killer's DNA is in a database, even a partial match to a relative could help investigators find the right family and maybe eventually the killer.
Wow. So it's like building a family tree, but with DNA.
Yeah. It's pretty amazing.
But for that to work, you need that initial DNA sample.
Right.
Is there any chance that evidence was lost or damaged over time?
It's possible. Unfortunately, evidence handling back then wasn't as good as it is now.
Right.
But even if some evidence is unusable, there might be other things to look at.
Like what?
Well, they could re-examine the witness statements, maybe use new interview techniques or forensic psychology to get more information.
Yeah, our understanding of criminal psychology has come a long way.
It really has.
Do you think there's anything we can learn from modern profiling techniques that could be applied to this case, even though it happened so long ago?
Definitely, profiling is much more sophisticated now. It's more nuanced and data-driven.
Okay.
We might be able to refine the existing profile of the Honolulu Strangler, maybe identify new behavioral patterns or even generate new leads.
It's amazing how these new tools could breathe life back into a cold case.
It's pretty incredible.
But even if all of that fails to give us a definitive answer, is there value in continuing to revisit these unsolved crimes?
I think there is. It keeps the memory of the victims alive. It honors their lives, and it acknowledges the impact their loss had on their families and the community.
You're right. It's easy to get caught up in the mystery, but these were real people.
They were.
And their stories deserve to be remembered.
Absolutely. And even if we never find the killer, the process of revisiting the case can teach us things.
Like what?
We can learn about criminal behavior, we can improve investigative techniques, and maybe even prevent future tragedies.
So it's like learning from the past to protect the future.
Exactly.
But I have to admit, I'm still really drawn to the mystery of it all.
I understand.
Do you think we'll ever really know what happened, who was responsible for these murders?
That's the big question, isn't it? It's hard to say for sure, but I'm optimistic. I think with new technology, renewed investigation, and a little luck, we might get those answers someday.
I hope so.
You too.
So let's talk about the impact these murders had on Honolulu. You mentioned the fear, the uncertainty. How did the community cope with this collective trauma?
Well, there was a strong sense of people coming together to support each other. They shared information, and they took steps to protect themselves.
Okay.
Neighborhood watch groups, started up self-defense classes became popular, and there was a big push for more community policing.
It's interesting how these kinds of events can both divide and unite communities.
It's true.
You have fear and suspicion, but also this shared desire for safety and justice.
Exactly. And in Honolulu, I think the desire for justice is what really won out.
You think so?
Yeah, even though the case is unsolved, the community hasn't forgotten the victims. They're still remembered, and people are still searching for the truth.
It's really testament to the human spirit, you know?
It is.
That belief that even in the darkest times, hope and justice will prevail.
I agree.
But for the families of the victims, this isn't just history.
Right.
It's something they live with every day, this unanswered question, this open wound.
It's true. They deserve answers. They deserve to know what happened to their loved ones, and they deserve to see the person responsible brought to justice.
And that brings us back to the main question, was Howard Gay the Honolulu Strangler?
Right.
We've talked about the evidence, the other theories, the problems with the investigation, but after everything you've learned, do you think he was guilty?
It's really tough to say for sure.
Yeah.
There's no doubt he was a person of interest with a disturbing past and some incriminating behavior, but there's no solid proof linking him to the murders. So there's always that doubt.
So it comes down to weighing the circumstantial evidence against the possibility of reasonable doubt.
Exactly. And without that one piece of undeniable proof, we're left with more questions than answers.
That's the hard part about cold cases.
It is, but it doesn't mean we should stop looking for those answers.
Right.
And who knows, maybe someday with new technology, a fresh perspective, or a lucky break, the mystery of the Honolulu Strangler will finally be solved.
I hope so. Well, we've explored the investigation, the suspects, the impact this had on the community. But there's one more piece. I want to look at the psychology behind it all.
Okay.
What can we learn about the mind of a serial killer, especially one who seems to choose his victims so randomly?
That's a great question, and one that's worth exploring. Let's take a look at that in part 3 of our deep dive into the Honolulu Strangler case.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Honolulu Strangler case. You know, we've already talked about the investigation, the victims, the suspects, the impact of these murders on the community, but I think it's time to look at the psychology behind all of this.
Yeah, that's a good point, trying to understand what could drive someone to commit these kinds of acts.
Exactly. It's a dark side of human nature that's really hard to wrap your head around, but I think it's important to at least try to understand.
It is, if we want to prevent these kinds of things from happening again.
So in the case of the Honolulu Strangler, we have a killer who seemed to pick his victims randomly.
That's right. which makes it even harder to figure out a psychological profile.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no obvious pattern, no specific type.
It's like a puzzle with missing pieces.
But even without a clear victim profile, can we still use what we know about serial killers in general to try to understand this case?
Yeah, I think so. Even though every case is unique, there are certain psychological traits and motivations that we often see in serial killers.
Okay, so what are some of those common characteristics?
Well, one thing that often stands out is a history of trauma or abuse in childhood.
That makes sense. Trauma can have a huge impact on how someone develops, especially when they're young.
Exactly. It can lead to a lot of negative emotions.
Yeah.
Anger, rage, a need to be in control, and a really distorted view of the world.
And could that lead to someone wanting to hurt others?
Sometimes, yes, for some serial killers, the act of killing is a way to gain power and control over their victims.
It's like they're trying to compensate for the powerlessness they felt before.
Right. And then there are the psychological disorders that are often linked to serial killers, things like antisocial personality disorder, narcissistic personality disorder, and psychopathy.
Okay, can you explain those a little more? What are the signs of each one?
Sure. So antisocial personality disorder is basically a disregard for social norms, a lack of empathy, and a tendency towards impulsive behavior.
So someone who doesn't care about rules or how other people feel.
Basically, yeah.
What about narcissistic personality disorder?
People with that disorder have a huge sense of self-importance, they need constant admiration, and they lack empathy for others.
So they're very focused on themselves, their own needs.
That's right. They often see themselves as better than everyone else, and they can't handle criticism.
And lastly, psychopathy. What does that look like?
Psychopathy is a more severe form of antisocial personality disorder.
Okay.
People with psychopathy show a lack of remorse. They can be superficially charming, and they're often manipulative.
So basically they have no conscience.
It's more complex than that, but yeah, they can be very charming, but also very dangerous.
So we're talking about trauma personality disorders, a need for power and control. It all sounds pretty scary.
It is a dangerous combination. But it's important to remember that not everyone who has these experiences or traits will become a serial killer.
Of course not. But it seems like these are some of the risk factors.
They are, and that's why it's so important to identify these risks early on and get people the help they need.
Yeah, if we can address these issues early, maybe we can prevent some of these tragedies.
Exactly. Now, we don't have enough information about the Honolulu Strangler to say for sure if he had any of these disorders.
Right, we don't even know for sure if it was Howard Gay.
Exactly. But looking at the crimes, the random victims, and the lack of a clear motive, it's possible he had some of these traits.
So even without a definite profile, there's still a lot we can learn from looking at the psychology of serial killers.
Absolutely. And this knowledge can be valuable not only for investigators, but for everyone.
How so?
Well, if we know the warning signs, the risk factors, and the motivations, we can be more aware and take steps to protect ourselves and our loved ones.
That's a really important message.
I think so. And as we wrap up, I want to touch on something we talked about earlier, the impact of these murders on Honolulu.
The fear, the uncertainty, that feeling that no one was safe.
Right. But I also want to remember the strength of the community, how people came together to support each other.
Yeah, that's an important point. Even in the darkest times, there's always hope.
I agree. And for Honolulu, that hope comes from the ongoing search for answers, the belief that justice will win in the end.
It's been a long and complicated road, but the story of the Honolulu Strangler isn't over.
Not by a long shot. And there's still so much we can learn from this case about the psychology of serial killers, the challenges of cold cases, and how communities can come together after tragedy.
I think we've covered a lot today, the facts, the theories, the unanswered questions, and the psychology of this really disturbing case.
We have, and hopefully this deep dive has given you a better understanding of the Honolulu Strangler and the impact of these unsolved crimes.
That's what we aim for with every deep dive, to go beyond the headlines, to look at things from different angles and leave you with something to think about.
That's right.
So as we close out this exploration of the Honolulu Strangler, we encourage you to keep learning about this case. Read more, listen to podcasts, and form your own opinions.
And if you have any thoughts or theories, we'd love to hear them.
Yeah, reach out and let us know. We love hearing from our listeners.
Absolutely. It's all about keeping the conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into this mystery, a mystery that still fascinates and intrigues us.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay safe.